When we concluded Sefer Breshit, the book of Genesis, 2 weeks ago, we were left with a group of people as they settled into a foreign land, navigating relationships after generations of strife, disagreement, and difficulty. They were beginning to know how to relate to and treat each other. They began to know the true answer to the question asked at the beginning of the Torah, Hashomer achi anochi, am I my brother's keeper? But this new book of Exodus brings us into an entirely different realm. No longer about the relationships between individuals and families, but the relationships between a group of people, a nascent community, their leader and their God. And so, while we often think of Exodus as the story of a clan growing into a nation, or as the story of the Israelites' struggle for freedom, Parshat Va'era offers us a different model. We can also look at the narrative as not just how we became a community, but how we became a community within the context of relationship and community building. Our reading this week begins with a shift in God's positioning and presence. Ve'era, meaning as God appeared in the relationship between Moses and the people. These relationships were complicated and ever-changing, and the sensitivity and attunement in these dynamics serve us in building relationships, which is at the heart of meeting God and one another where we are. To set the scene, Moses, having recently returned to Egypt from his long hiatus in Midian, is tasked with leading the people to freedom. When Pharaoh repeatedly refuses to let the Israelites go, God sends a series of plagues, water turning into blood, frogs, lice, wild animals, death of the livestock, boils, and hail. In Tanakh, we encounter many aspects of the divine personality, ranging from the all-powerful and commanding to the gentle and caring. In Va'era, we discover the divine through the attribute of love, at a moment of intimacy in which God issues a proclamation and vision. In Exodus chapter 6, as God speaks to Moses, we read, Shamati, I have heard the moaning of the children of Israel, whom Egypt is holding in servitude, and I have remembered my brit, my covenant. Say to the children of Israel, I am God, v'hotzeti, I will free you from the labors of the Egyptians, v'hitzalti, I will rescue you from bondage, v'ga'alti, I will redeem you with the zeroa netuyah, an outstretched arm with great acts of judgment. V'lakachti, I will take you to be my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am Adonai, your God, who has rescued you from your bondage in Egypt. I will bring you into the land over which I lifted my hand in an oath to give to your forefathers, and I will give it to you as a possession. I am Adonai. These verses, which we conceive of as a collection of promises that God made to the people, offer us a model for building relationships and encountering others. Despite God's absence in their lives for centuries, we learn that the divine hasn't forgotten nor abandoned Bnei Israel, having heard their cries, witnessed their suffering, and affirmed the harrowing experience of subjugation and enslavement. God also commits to free, deliver, and redeem Bnei Israel. We even learn about the future developments of the relationship at Mount Sinai, when upon receiving the Torah, the symbolic marriage between God and the people of Israel will occur. God reassures the people of the promise made long ago to their ancestors, that they will return to the land of Canaan. The oath then comes to a close with the proclamation of God's name. God has been far away and now seeks to draw closer to the people, displaying and voicing messages of dedication. And expressing a desire to be with the people, God shows us the first step in relationship building, being present to listen. The first words of the declaration were, Shamati, I have heard, listened, and absorbed your situation. God is knocking at their door, and all Bnei Yisrael needs to do is to open and say yes. But as we read in Exodus chapter 6, verse 9, Vayidaber Moshe kein el bnei Yisrael v'lo shamu el Moshe miktzor ruach u'mavodah kasha. When Moses told this to the Israelites, they would not listen to Moses, their spirits crushed by cruel labor. They were unable to listen. It seems that in a moment, all the hope of liberation from the Meitzar, the narrow place of constriction, is shut down and silenced. God might have just come knocking and have said, Shemati, I have heard your cries. And Moses may have just come to lead them to Canaan. But the people were battered, traumatized, and ignored. How could they have been able to listen? In order to listen, there must be a foundation of trust. And I find it hard to believe or imagine how a people with such a transient and painful history and dire present circumstances, being enslaved, could have believed that there was a person who could bring them out, backed by a deity who even cared about their redemption. Nachmanides, a medieval commentator, explains the people's emotional, psychological, and theological experiences had paralyzed their spirit, crushing their hope and faith. The root of the people's skepticism and doubt was due to the treatment they received and the circumstances they underwent, which resulted in a low spirit. Rashi, the medieval French rabbi and commentator, holds that the people had lost hope and became solidified in the belief that they would never attain freedom. They were convinced that it never would happen. Similarly, Maimonides, the most distinguished philosopher and scholar of the Middle Ages, believes that their dismissal of Moses grew out of their distrust in the prospect of God intervening, as they had become accustomed to their conditions. If trust is the foundation of hearing and knowing that one has been heard, how could the people, Moshe and God, feel that there was any trust? Trust needed to grow and develop relationally and personally, especially within Moses, in developing greater trust in his speaking abilities and in his role. Might the people have said yes if there was trust? There is a disappointment in these relationships. There is apprehension and there is drama. The relationships and encounters we see in our traditional texts are messy. They are full of complexity of the human and divine experience. As we know, relationships are not easy, and it takes hard work, dedication, and attention for them to become long-lasting. While God's oath is powerful and a grand experience that pulls at our heartstrings, it fails in effect because there is no relationship to speak of, at least not yet. God, the people, and Moses have taken a step forward in closer proximity, but the people are not yet ready to hear. For us to be able to hear one another, we need to work at it continuously. While we can be disappointed with the people's skepticism and the second guessing of Moses, can we really blame them? All parties need to be in conversation to accept the oath and to hear Moses. The Sfat Emet, the 19th century Rebbe of Ger Hasidim, offers insight both into the people's inability to genuinely hear and Moses' speech limitations. Citing Psalms 57, "Hear my people and I will speak," he says that to be a witness, an advocate, and a leader of the people, Moses must first be able to hear. Similarly, we must know those with whom we strive to be in relationship, the complexities of their lives. Before we speak, we should listen. In any relationship, we must first see ourselves as witness to another person's lived experience, to their story. The Sfat Emet continues by saying that speech was in exile and that the enslaved Israelites could not express a sense of self, a purpose, or a future. Similarly, Moses had a kol, a sound, and was able to talk, but there was no dibur, there was no actual speech that came out of his mouth. The Sfat Emet continues that as long as those who were to receive Torah had not yet readied themselves to hear the word of God, had they been able to do so and had they been ready, they would have been redeemed immediately. And here's the kicker. The Sfat Emet concludes, we have to prepare ourselves to truly hear the Shema. The Shema, the divine voice, an awareness of the surrounding realities, the people and experiences we encounter, and the voice we hear within our innermost self. The Sfat Emet teaches us that we need to do the work, investing in cultivating our abilities to be open and be receptive to that which might be challenging or pose difficulty, be it from others, God, or from within our own hearts. We have to prepare before we can engage. While God's oath is profoundly moving, the people could not listen, and Moses could not speak. They didn't have a real relationship. They didn't yet know each other, and they had not prepared themselves to hear. Not surprisingly, there was no trust to be found. It should come as no real surprise that just a few verses later we read, as Moses rhetorically asks to God, "Vayidaber Moshe lifnei Adonai, lomar hein b'nei Yisrael lo shamu alai, ve'ech yishme'eni paro ve'ani aral sfatayim." If the Israelites won't listen to me, in what world would Pharaoh pay me any heed? For I am one who gets tongue-tied. Moses is unsure of himself, his abilities, and his task, fearful of rejection. Yet Moses models the people's response. Like the people, he is not ready, not confident, and unsure. While we wanted to hear an enthusiastic yes, the people were unable to hear. Velo shamu. The people could not hear Moses, let alone agree to a covenant with a deity who until recently was out of the picture. God was not heard, felt, seen, or experienced, coupled with a prophet who had lived a life of privilege on the other side of the Nile. He has yet to listen to the people to understand their experiences, their beliefs, and their needs. Before God can jump into the covenant, the oath of becoming B'nai Yisrael, God and God's people, what would have happened if God paused? If the people understood the scope of their trauma and knew there was a God that loved them, now and all along, who cared about their well-being. If God didn't only hear at that moment, but somehow in God's infinite abilities was able to declare God's self as a sense of presence to the people. If everyone expanded their capabilities and capacities to listen and tame the voice of excitement, hope, and the promise of redemption to overshadow the task of seeing, affirming, and witnessing. Beyond knowing the other, we need to understand ourselves better before the covenant or the heart of the encounter can occur. God, Moses, and B'nai Yisrael, like our neighbors and us, are tied together and dependent on one another. A moment of pause to process allows us to better enter into a covenant and commitment to a relationship with one another, our communities, and within ourselves. God's powerful and supportive presence offers us a model of care and dedication we can emulate. Just like the divine, we can hear and remember before doing. In Witness, Lessons from Elie Wiesel's Classroom, Ariel Berger uplifts Wiesel's pedagogical mission, which speaks to God's pastoral and relational presence in Parshat Vayera. The work of being present and actively listening to those that surround us. He writes, listening to a witness makes you a witness. The conditions they face and the environments they find themselves in enable us to learn their story empathetically and with grace. Trust is the foundation for meaningful connections and relationships. According to the mystics, it was through speech that the world was created. In order to listen, there must be trust, which enables us to speak. May we be blessed first to listen, hear, and then propelled to speak toward creating a world in which we are held, supported, nurtured across the spectrum of relationships. I'd like to thank many people for coming. First, I would like to acknowledge and give thanks to Kadosh Baruch Hu, the everlasting one whose presence has been constant and a guide of support. My experience in rabbinical school has not been an easy one. It's been quite a long journey, full of many highs and sometimes of difficult lows. I would like to thank my many teachers, both here at JTS and across the many places and spaces I've had the opportunity to learn things in the world as well as Torah. I would like to thank the cohort that I began with for their support, friendship, and care, and the cohort I joined for their openness, kindness of spirit, and love. To the many mentors, both here and far, Rabbi Ariel Russo, Rabbi Michel Schlesinger, Rabbi Jill Borden, and to Rabbi Sarit Horowitz for her guidance and support in putting together this sermon. To my friends, peers, and comrades, thank you for being here and for your friendship and support, and for showing up. Thank you to my parents, and I'm so glad that you could be here in person to share this moment with me. And to my beloved, my chavruta, my partner Leah, for your constant support, care, and love. We turn to Kaddish D'Rabbanan, page 13. Yitkadal v'kadash shemei Rabbah, v'yalmad yivrach yirutei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon uv'mechon, v'chay dechol Beit Yisrael, v'gala v'zman kariv v'yimeru, amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach, lel u'mayalmaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach, v'yitbar v'yitmam v'yinaseh, v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal, shmei d'kudisha, brichu, le'ela min kol berachata v'shirata, tush b'chata v'nechmata, damiram be'alma v'yimeru, amen. Al Yisrael v'al Rabbanan v'al Tamidehon v'al kol Tamidei Talmidehon v'al kol ma'an daskin ba'araita di be'atra hadin v'din b'kol atar v'atar yehei l'chon l'chon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamin v'chayin arichin u'zona rivecha v'rkana min kadam v'hon di b'shmaya v'imru amen yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim tovim alini v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen oseh shalom b'imruav hu v'yaseh shalom alenu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen.